Hey, welcome. So we're going to be starting a unit on percents. And to start off with, let's talk really just about what are percents. Most of you are probably familiar with percents. You see them a lot in daily life. You go to the store and something might be 30% off. Maybe you're a student and you get an 85% on your test. So what do those numbers mean? Are they just like arbitrary numbers that people pull out of a hat because they sound good? Well, not really. They have a meaning. So what is a percent? Well, a percent is a ratio that compares something to 100. So if you got an 85% on your test, that means that out of every 100 problems on your test, that you got 85 of them right. There might not have been 80 or 100 questions on your test, so that comes out to something that is proportionate. Whatever you got right on your test is proportionate to 85 out of 100. That's how percents work. So here we have a grid. This grid is sectioned off into 20 different squares, and we have 5 squares that are shaded. So we're going to figure out what percent of this grid is shaded, and here's how you do that. You follow these steps. First of all, you would count up how many are shaded. We already said there's 5. So we're going to write a ratio or a fraction of shaded pieces, which are the smaller parts, that's the part we're dealing with, over the whole number, which is 20 out of the total. So we've got 5 shaded squares out of 20. All right. So that's the ratio we're dealing with that is proportionate to some number out of 100. Next, we're going to divide. We're going to change our fraction to a decimal. We're going to do that by dividing our numerator by our denominator. So 5 divided by 20, and I'm just experiencing a little bit of forgetfulness here. But 5 divided by 20 will give you 0.25, and that really should have come more naturally to me. All right, so 0.25. Finally, we multiply this number by 100. So if we multiply 0.25 by 100, we get 25%. So 25% of our grid is shaded in. That means that if we were to say, well, what percent is not shaded, we wouldn't even really have to go through this process again. We could just subtract this amount from 100, because when you're dealing with like totals, 100 is the largest percent you can have. Like when you're talking about totals, you can never have more than 100% of something. You can if you're talking about increases or decreases. Something can increase by more than 100%, but like you couldn't have 100% of an apple, or like you couldn't have 120% of an apple. You can't have more of that same apple than you already had. So, okay, clearing the ink. Next slide. We are going to shade 10% of this grid. Okay, so here's our grid that we're going to shade 10% of. Well, in order to do that, you need to know exactly what 10% of this grid is. Like I said, percents are not just arbitrary numbers. We can't just decide, like, okay, let's shade in 6. That sounds like it's probably 10%. So here's how we do this. First, we are going to divide our percent by 100 to get a decimal. So we're going to do 10 divided by 100 to get the decimal, 0.1. All right, next we're going to multiply this number by the total number of squares in the grid. So we're going to do, there's again 20. All right, so 20 times 0.1 is going to give us 2. All right, so this is the number of squares that should be shaded in. So we'll go ahead and do that with a large ink. So we'll shade that, and we'll shade that. All right. So that's all for this video. We just kind of wanted to get into what percents are, what do those numbers mean, and hopefully I've given you a little bit of a foundation, some base knowledge on what percents actually stand for. Once again, just to review, they are a ratio comparing something to 100.